think we'll get started. Cool. So glad to be here in Iowa. I lived in Iowa for 5 years while I was earning my bachelor's degrees at the University of Iowa. And it's just so great to be back here. I love Iowa. I'm originally from outside the Chicago area. And I'm going to show you a photo here just to get to know me a little bit better in maybe a different way than the typical kind of like, here's who I am, here's where I work kind of stuff. Here's the photo of me on graduation day. What year was that? I honestly would have to think about it. But what is important about this picture to me is a couple of things. And again, it was like, I guess it was before digital cameras, right? So I had to take a photo of my printed out. I found it in the photo album at home. And I was told that I wouldn't get into this school by my guidance counselor in high school. He was like, nah, you won't get into the University of Iowa. I guess I didn't have grades that were what was expected at Iowa. And you know what I did? I wrote a letter, and I explained how I really wanted to go to the University of Iowa, and I wanted to be in Iowa because I have family in Iowa. My aunt and cousins are in Iowa City, and they accepted me. And then I graduated with honors, Phi Beta Kappa. And I'm really proud of that because I really worked hard. You know, Linda was talking about working really hard and really focusing. And somebody told me I couldn't do it, and it kind of really pushed me to want to succeed. And I had a wonderful experience living in Iowa for 5 years. So I'm really happy to be back. But let's move into some of the content. So I don't know about you, but I love to learn how do I get better at serving teams in the companies that I work with. I've been working in a team support type capacity for about 20 years. And I read books, and I would see things like this, and I'd be encouraged to try to fight the forces of change at all costs. We want highly productive teams. We want teams that really can produce and perform. So keep them stable, keep them the same. And I'd come to learn throughout the years that, wait a minute, I was doing kind of a personal retrospective about my career, and I thought to myself, everything was really changeable. And when we tried to keep it all the same, it was almost counterproductive to some of the goals of our companies. And I think as the years have gone on, there's different research that's out. This is a wonderful book by Amy Edmondson. She talks a lot about having teams that feel safe to express themselves and disagree. And she talks about psychological safety, but she acknowledges, and other Harvard professors like her acknowledge too, that we're really dealing with moving targets. And so I'm kind of curious about this room of people because you self-selected to come into this talk. I asked this question earlier when we were giving pitches for our talks, but raise your hand if you've had a new person join your team in the past month. Okay, and look around. So it's a little bit more than that wide group. Raise your hand if someone's left your team in the past month. Maybe they went to a different team or a different company. Okay, so you know, it's like what I said earlier, team change is inevitable. So let's shift our focus a little bit and focus on how do we help the teams succeed that are changing around. Maybe it's more of a reteaming at the edges, one person in or one person moves on to a different team, or maybe it's bigger than that. And this is the concept that I call dynamic reteaming, and it only takes one person to change a team system. So let's dig in a little bit more. I guess a little bit more about my background. So I've been at, really my career has been at 3 main companies, and I had a stint as a consultant for about a year. I was at a startup. We built GoToMeeting and GoToWebinar. I was an interaction designer and editor, technical project manager, and our teams changed a lot because I was the 15th employee. I left when there were 800. We didn't just kind of all have one big stand-up, 1,500 people. I mean, we shift and morphed as we did throughout the years. The second startup that I was at, I was the 10th employee, hired in as a scrum master at a company called AppFolio, where deliberately the leadership was like, we will be agile from the start. So it wasn't a case where a company was transforming to agile or implementing some kind of scaling framework. It was more like, we're going to use lean and techniques from extreme programming and kind of grow from there. We changed our teams a lot deliberately for a variety of reasons. So I've experienced a lot of change in this company, which is a public company traded on the NASDAQ, very successful company. And the first one, the company that I was talking about here, Expert City, we got acquired by Citrix. This legacy of what we built all those years ago was acquired by LogMeIn. You know, many people use these tools for remote communication. So it's kind of like, wait, we weren't doing it wrong at these companies by having highly changeable teams. So some of that literature that I read way back when was kind of like, well, maybe that doesn't really apply to us because we were kind of different. We changed and grew, but still created tremendous value in the world. Now I'm at the third company. I've been at Procore Technologies for more than 2.5 years, I think now. We're building a shared platform to connect people in the construction industry. So our mission is that, and our vision is to improve the lives of everyone in construction. Procore has added 1,000 people since I started. 1,000 people in the past 2 years. Now I'm in the R&D department, and so it's not like we added 1,000 people only in R&D, but we had a tremendous growth spurt, and we continue to grow and hire to achieve our vision and our mission in the world. And so we're changing a lot too. And so it's kind of like a business decision. Okay, how do we help our teams grow and thrive when everything's changing a lot and continues to change? I think there was Procore posts a lot of things on LinkedIn, and there was a new hire class that started just last week, 35, 40 people. We have gotten really good at onboarding and dealing with this kind of change. So again, my name is Heidi Hefland. I just wanted to give you this. If you would like to continue the discussion with me at all, this is my LinkedIn. I would encourage you to connect. I always love meeting new people and sharing stories. And I don't claim to have all the answers, by the way. I'm a practitioner working with teams inside this organization. And I'm going to share some techniques and strategies that I've learned from working with teams that I find quite useful and that I use frequently. So I'll tell you some stuff in here that maybe I did with some teams a couple of weeks ago. I wrote a book called Dynamic Reteaming to dig into this idea of team change, because I thought, all right, my experience, as I've just explained it, has been a lot of changing teams. Was it just us? Was it just this Southern California thing? I live outside the Los Angeles area. Procore's in Carpinteria, California. The other companies are in Santa Barbara, where I started. Was it just us? I became really, really curious. And I interviewed people around the world and derived some patterns for how teams change, reasons why teams change, and some techniques to get better at it. Because that's what I'm about, at least. I want to help these companies and teams thrive. So these are some of the patterns that I've derived from the research. And when I was at University of Iowa, I studied linguistics. Anyone ever take a linguistics course before? It's kind of more of a niche subject, perhaps. But one of the things we did in linguistics is we would gather data, we'd analyze the data, and we'd write about the patterns that we found. And we tried to explain the distribution of the data. And that's pretty much the approach I took in this book. I interviewed worldwide colleagues, had the data transcribed, coded it for themes, and came up with these patterns. So I already talked about the one-by-one pattern at the top right, which is when somebody joins a team or somebody leaves a team. That's a certain type of team change, and there's things that you can do to make it easier. Isolation, you take a team, you form a team, put the team to the side, give them process freedom, very helpful in situations where you have an emergency or maybe you want to kind of create something new in a beneficial silo. Also helpful if you want to start a different process off to the side, grow it from there, later kind of deprecate your existing process. It's another strategy. Switching is when maybe someone moves on this team for a little while and then that team. People move from team to team for a variety of reasons, and we'll dig into that a little bit. Merging, companies merge together. We acquired a couple companies recently at Procore, so how do we integrate? And there's different ways about that. Some teams join together. And then grow and split. Has this ever happened to any of your teams? They grow bigger, things change, and maybe they split into a couple smaller teams. Has that happened to any of you? It feels like a natural occurrence sometimes, especially if your companies are growing really fast. So that's just a brief overview of the patterns. And these patterns can take place at multiple levels in the company. So my company acquires another company, it's at a very high level, switching. Maybe I'm burned out with the team that I'm on and I want a different experience. Maybe I want to learn something new or work with different people. I might switch to another team. So it happens at all these different levels. And a lot of the times, if you have a lot of dynamic reteaming, a lot of these changes happening at once, it can be happening at all the levels. And the closer it is, the more you feel about it. And it happens in different ways. This is a wonderful graphic that I have adopted from Sam Kainer, who wrote a book called The Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making. Really interesting book if you facilitate teams. Sometimes the decisions come from the top. It's just a fact. It's a business decision. We're going to do this. We're going to grow. Mandate to grow. Have you ever had a mandate to grow? You know you're going to be hiring a lot of people. So it's not necessarily maybe the team's decision, but it's a business decision. It's a strategic decision. Sometimes we get asked for input. The decision maker is clear, and maybe we're all asked for input, so we get to impact that decision. And then sometimes, maybe we just make the decisions, and it's consensus, and no clear one decision maker, but we come to an agreement. I don't think any of these methods of making decisions or dealing with change really is better than the other. It's just, I think they're just a fact that teams change, and the decisions for having teams change will go down in different ways. So why does this happen? Why do teams change? I think growth and attrition, companies growing, companies shrinking. When you're in the position to hire a lot of people, things are pretty good. I mean, we got to appreciate that. Sometimes we have new worker focus that starts a new team. Sometimes we want to deliberately share knowledge amongst our teams. We'll take a look at an example later about a company that deliberately reteams in order to spread knowledge or information. And then I think the final reason, these are again derived from the data in the research that I did, is for stagnation and learning. Forming, storming, norming, performing. I think the forgotten phase is stagnating when you're on a team for too long or you're working on the same thing for too long. And too long might mean different things to each individual. I think we have different preferences for change. But on the other hand, sometimes you're in a great team situation. You want it to last forever. And that's wonderful too. I'm not saying bust up all your teams. But these are some of the reasons why the teams change. And this talk is going to focus a lot about growth. So what can we do about fast-growing companies or when we're in the situation where we're dealing with a lot of team changes? So I'm going to talk about 5 strategies, so 5 approaches and their practical techniques in there. So the first one is to focus on relationship building within your teams and amongst your teams. And so I'll talk about some techniques that I've used to facilitate relationship building. I think if you really know the people you work with, you start to care about them, and then other things are just easier. And I was at the second startup that I was at Appfolio. I remember coming to one point in my work there as an Agile coach that I only focused on people and relationship. I kind of punted on other issues, and it was almost like a keystone habit, right? If you say that you want to do some sports and get in shape, sometimes your eating habits improve. That's a keystone habit, right? I think focusing on people and relationship is the same kind of way. It leads to other things for free. So I think you can accelerate knowing each other. One activity I love to do, I learned from Lisa Atkins, and I can share all the instructions for how to do these things, by the way, if you're interested. This is an activity you can do in about an hour called Market of Skills, and people get together and they make posters about themselves. These are the skills I bring to the team. These are my interests outside of work, my hobbies. This is what I want to learn in the next few months, and this is what I offer to teach you. And people make these posters and share with each other, and then people listen for, okay, well, what skills do they have that they didn't list? What are the things that I like to do too? We put Post-it notes all over these posters, and it builds a lot of common ground. I worked with a team once, and we had a new team member join, and it was kind of a tough situation because there was an engineer on the team, this is years ago, and you really had to kind of earn his respect. I don't know, he was kind of hard to work with, but when he learned that this new person could take apart a motorcycle and put it back together, it built this instant bridge. And it's not like we all have time to really brag about our skills or share things. I mean, that's awkward in itself. So it gives people an opportunity to kind of share what they think that they're good at and what their hobbies are. After doing things like this, people usually, I was working with a team once, they all wanted training with Salesforce. We found that. They all wanted to learn a similar thing. Or maybe you discover that there's a lot of foodies in the room, and then you go do something related to food. It can lead to shared experiences. And the investment is like an hour. You can do it over lunch. With a lot of this team stuff, I find that it's great to work out with the teams how much time they want to invest, because we don't have a lot of time, right? It's luxurious to go away for a day to learn something. So I tend to do a lot of things for teams over time in like 3 hours or less. Typically, I get 2 hours. So it's like, how much value can I bring in 2 hours? I do the best I can. I think another thing about relationship building is really turning on the video, especially if you have team members in different places. And if companies are growing really fast, sometimes it just becomes distributed. Even if you're in the same location and you're on different floors, you're distributed. Like, you can't see each other all the time. So I was with it. This is when I was consulting. I was with this one team, and I was with these two engineers on the phone. We were waiting for some process to complete. We were downloading something that we were working on. And I heard a dog bark. And I said, "Oh, you have a dog," because the videos were off. I'm like, "Hold up your dog." And so he holds up this Pomeranian. I was like, I mean, that's the exact picture. I took a screenshot. I was like, "Wow, you have a Pomeranian." And then the other gentleman that was on the call, he was like, "Wait a minute." And he holds up a Pomeranian too. He held it up too. And I was like, "You guys have worked together for 7 years. You didn't know that you both have this rare dog?" Like, I don't think that, it's not that common, is it? So I think, turning on the videos can be helpful. And I think, okay, so you turn on the video, you can kind of see this team here. But when the teams get bigger, our friends that are in other locations, you can see them clearly if you're like one person, one screen. But then there's always that meeting where there's people in a conference room. You ever have this and you can't see their faces, or maybe they're not on the camera. And so I think it helps when building relationships if you can actually see each other. But, there's exceptions, right? You don't feel well, whatever, you don't want anybody to see you today. I think the teams can work out agreements, but in general, I think, especially for in other locations, how can we foster knowing each other? It's helpful to at least, if you never show your video and we're in the same airport terminal sitting at the gate, how am I going to even find you? I probably won't, So video helps. This is another activity that I like to do. This is a wonderful book called Creating Intelligent Teams. It's about coaching teams as systems. I've done training with this group before. I highly recommend it. But this is a picture of a offsite we had at Procore with our whole R&D. We did an open space kind of unconference about how we can collaborate better, and we got a lot of benefit from that. The day before, we decided to do some activities to really help people talk about the different roles we have on the team and what's challenging about the roles. How do I offer to help someone in a different role? So we have roles like quality assurance engineer, user experience, software engineer, et cetera. So there's activities that you can do to really, if you have a similar experience with roles on different teams, when you switch, it makes it easier. So how can we kind of align and have better kind of role clarity is helpful. And how can we really understand challenges of different roles so that we have empathy for their plight? Helps us kind of work better together. Learning together is another tactic for relationship building. This is an engineering academy where the engineers offer to teach courses to each other, and they're for a different variety of hours. So within the community, the research and development community, we have this, and it helps foster relationship building and finding people that have similar interests. Having food together is another thing. We go out to lunch together. You can have a get-to-know-you lunch and expense it. Experiences together. Here's a whitewater rafting trip at a company. Somebody fell out of the boat there, but he survived. This is a great book that influenced me at the second company that I was at. We would do an annual tech retreat. We'd do sports together and have different experiences together. Coaching for Performance. There's a chapter on working with teams, and he talks about that, having Finding people with similar interests and then doing things. So if you get to know people and then the team's changed, and if you buy some of the forming, storming, norming, maybe some of that team gel has already happened outside the team so that when you come together as a team, it's a bit easier. Kind of facilitates reteaming. How many of you are here with colleagues that you work with? Wonderful. Learning together. This is a picture of a team that went to a conference together. So you'll get these different experiences, you can talk about it, and it'll change the way that you work, and you'll have a new energy and energized about solving your problems. I think also, I work with a technical project manager, Bill Hatfield. He always talks about working with teams to come up with victory conditions. I always would make up about project managers that they manage people to a schedule and kind of keep them in line. He's like, actually, I work with teams to come up with victory conditions, and then I hold them to that, and we work together, and then we celebrate when we hit the victory conditions. This team was at a different company, but they used to bang a gong and announce the things that they did. So these were like the traditions that brought them together. Writing down team agreements. Again, not a new concept. This is Nolan. It's okay for you to interrupt him when he's coding. He really doesn't mind. It's helpful to know that because not everybody is like that. We have different preferences for when we want to be interrupted or not. We have different preferences for being in conflict together, which is another thing we work out. If I say something and it bothers you, please talk with me soon. And then let's go for a walk. Those are my real personal preferences about conflict. I want to know about it as soon as possible, and let's go for a walk. Other people have different preferences, so we try to normalize conflict and plan for it and have agreements about it. But then you can also have team agreements about how you do your work. Maybe you have a workflow, and when something gets a code review, okay, well, what needs to be true for it to go in the code review phase? So we try to document these and reflect on them. And it helps us with our relationships as well, because we get deeper than just the work. So sometimes we have really fast growth. So we were talking about maybe hiring one person in, one person out, but sometimes things get or feel really fast. Like a lot of these changes going on at the different levels. We acquired a company, 10 people were hired, this team grew and split, these teams merged together and are reforming around work. Sometimes there's a lot of this stuff going on, and people seem to ask this question, how do we maintain our culture? It feels different than it did before. What's going on? And when your company grows and grows and grows, it's going to feel different. It is changing. And this question is like a clue, I think, to pay attention to the people. So there's different culture shifts that happen as the companies grow, right? More formal job descriptions, maybe. If you're at a startup and you do a lot of different things, as you grow bigger, people specialize. It's just a natural thing that happens. Hierarchy might form. We have less hierarchy, more hierarchy. These are just examples of what the culture, how the culture might feel different. Focus on building individuals or hiring individuals. Well, now there's these managers and they're hiring and they're building these groups. That feels a lot different than before. Maybe our department was pretty free to do things, but now we have centralized efforts from kind of the mothership department. It feels a lot different than it was before. Maybe before we're focusing on building the products to survive, and we're still doing that, but then people want career paths. Where's my promotion? So we have to build all these systems. So we build the software for the customers, but we're also building the organizations, like a lot of the work of the leadership teams to figure out how to do this. And I think also when people say, how do we maintain our culture, it's because they feel like there's a lot more process coming. Have you experienced any of this? So it is a culture shift. It is a culture change. So it's kind of like, how do we coach the teams through the culture change, which is the next of the 5, right? So when you're dynamically reteaming a lot, how do we support the people when the culture is changing a lot? And I think one of the things is just to realize that, so a new person starts, they might go through a dip and not be effective for 90 days or something, like, what am I doing here? Okay, I see what I'm doing. We help them, we onboard them. We're really good at onboarding people, and I think we've been talking about that in our industry for years. But what about the people that are already there and helping the existing teams make sense of all the growth? So there's things that we can do to help them shift through this culture change and how different it feels. Because it's our company together. It's not, it's not more your company if you were there in the first team or at the startup team. I was at 2 companies, and I always felt like a lot of ownership for helping build the companies. And at the 3rd company I'm at, I'm more coaching the people that have been there for a long time, and I'm a newer person to the scene, employee 800. But wait a minute, like, I care about this company too. That's why I joined. I believe in the mission, I believe in the vision, I believe in the leadership, so how can I help the company be more successful? So I think there's things that you can do to bring both communities together, which is an activity I call the story of our team. So this is a picture of a team that grew and changed. I had them, everybody stand up and make a line. On the left, the people have been here the longest. On the right, you just joined. So people talk to each other and they make a shared timeline on the wall. This is when I joined. This is when Joe left. These are big milestones we've attained as a team. It's the story of our team. And so what we do is we make this shared visual, and they write on it. They talk to the person next to them. And then you take your camera from your phone, and then you make a video, and they tell the story of the team. And then you just pin that to the channel in your chat tool, right? And then you have this archive that tells the story of the team. And then when new people join, maybe they can watch that, because you just do this period, maybe twice a year, right? But the idea is to share the stories of the past and the future, and then people can talk about the reason they joined the company. So the idea is to try to bring in the positivity for this community, because we're all there together to help this place succeed, and we all want to be there. So it's the story of our team. I did this with our London office that was forming. So you can do it, a lot of these activities you can do beyond like the cross-functional agile team. You can do it with groups. Maybe there's a manager with 10 people working with the manager, but they're spread across multiple teams. You can do it with them. You could do it with a department. You could do it with an office that formed. I find it to be very helpful, and I love doing this, and people like it. Evoking shared causes via open space. So that open space conference I was talking about, where we brought people together to solve a problem of collaboration. I think let's say we're a company in here, and maybe we've grown really fast. Maybe we doubled in size in the past year. How do we really get to know each other if we're working in these different teams? How can we form guilds in that kind of Spotify sense, where we have shared causes across the teams? So you can pose a question like, how can we collaborate better? Imagine we were forming the conference schedule to solve that challenge, and then people came up with guilds. For example, maybe something that we all face is technical debt. Well, okay, if we want to find all the people interested in that, like, we can put that on the wall and see who goes over there. All right, suddenly they found each other, and maybe they have a challenge for 90 days to kind of improve something in that way. So that's the kind of thing that we did. So I think you can help this growth reteaming by helping people form communities. It won't happen by chance necessarily. Maybe someone can create a channel in your chat tool, and that might help too. So there's other ways. Again, I don't have all the answers. I'm just sharing some tactics. I think, all right, what's the glue for when the companies grow and change? Symbols. Symbols are glue. This was one company. Every time they hit a major accomplishment, it looks like 100 customers, 300 customers, they celebrated with rafting oars. Remember that early photo of whitewater rafting? This company had an early whitewater rafting trip, and then a symbol of the rafting oar. We're rowing together that way, right? It became this glue. So it was a cadence, 9 years at least, where we were signing these oars. Company went public, we signed an oar. You could see when we got a graphic designer, because it's a little more slick than this is somebody did that in their garage, but that was awesome, right? It's like minimum viable oar. You iterate. I think useful values are also glue. Here's one company, here's Procore's openness, ownership, optimism. You can remember the values. I was at another company. I helped write the values. I can't tell you what they were because they were too wordy. I remember one was about small teams, but useful values can be glue throughout the years, anchored to kind of the behaviors that the company believes in. Rituals are glue. This is a company that has 24-hour hack days twice a year. They know that at a regular cadence, they can get together, build anything that they want, and get wacky prizes. Not money or anything like that, just honor and glory and like a shellacked clickety-clack keyboard. Rituals can be glue. So as the companies grow and change, like what are those things? What are the symbols? What are the values? What are the useful values? And what are the rituals? What are the things that you do every year or every month? I think another thing that I bring up when I coach people is really appreciate who we're becoming. So if you're in a company that's growing fast, hiring a lot of people, it's a great position to be in. I mean, the inverse of that is like failure and losing people. Like, it's great that the company's successful and growing. So let's focus there. How can we amplify that? How can we really help the people get together and be successful? Additional challenges. So I think when the companies are growing fast, there's going to be curveballs and surprises, and we get triggered. So there's some things about how we respond that I want you to pay attention to. And I say this to myself because I'm equally triggered by things, right? If maybe a change happens in your team and you lose access to information, or maybe you feel like we don't fear change, we fear loss. This is a great book, Leadership on the Line. It's a great audio book. But sometimes with these changes, we lose things. We lose status. We lose access to information or timely access to information. It can really hurt. So it's kind of like, how do you want to be in that, right? If you feel triggered or upset by something, I usually take the day off, get away, because then you'll feel different later. We can expect tectonic changes when we're adding a lot of people, maybe to these levels, right? The teams grow and split, but at larger levels, you'll have things happen. Maybe a division will split, or a group will split, or a department will split into a few. We can expect these higher level splits. It's kind of like, I don't know, it all builds up and it starts morphing. It's like alive. Some people will be like, okay, we're gonna have a reorg, we're gonna do some deliberate reteaming. And that's a thing. It's not always our decision what's gonna happen. Sometimes these things are just, they just happen. Even for me, like, I'm obsessed with this topic. It's very hard for me. The closer the change is, the harder it is usually, unless maybe it was your idea. So deliberate reteaming. Let's say you want to do that and you want to be humane about it and try to help it succeed and be the best for people. Here's some things I think that you can do. So including people in decision making and fostering agency and choice is the next of the 5. So sharing the plan and getting input. All right, let's say we're going through a big reteaming, reorg. They're really synonyms. Thought they weren't before, but it's really the same kind of thing. So, all right, we're doing this big change. Well, why? What problem are we trying to solve by changing, right? What does it look like today? What does the org structure look like today? All right, after this change, what does it look like? Let's make a visual, a before and an after. Maybe even have an FAQ. Are there any hiring plans? Let's expose the hiring. Maybe some people that are already here want to apply for those jobs and renew themselves. Any manager changes? Systems and tools. When you reorg, or even smaller kind of team shuffles, usually has implications for IT and facilities, and depending on your company, that could be require a lot of coordination, extra work. Creating a communication plan about the changes is important, and doing this swiftly and having a schedule. I think some of the larger reteamings, or even some of the smaller ones, if you don't have a schedule with somebody following and making sure it happens, they kind of drag on. Well, is this ever over? So communicating the things. Even here's like a before and after. See the two, Eva and Sven over there, and Valerie. Those are the team changes for this existing team. This is just draw it on a whiteboard. Let's say it's a smaller change. This is the before, and this is after, because we're busy, right? We won't even know where the people are going. And if we work with these teams, it's good to know. We have to add them to the meeting invites. They won't be at the stand-up. I mean, there's like a checklist you can come up with, and I can share things like that. Better yet, I think, again, fostering inclusion and agency, planning it together. This is a group. They had a reorg for about 80 people. They visualized it on whiteboards. We learned it from our colleague, Christian Linwall, who's at Spotify. When they went through a reorg of an infrastructure tribe, they visualized it on a whiteboard. And you put blank spaces representing who you're going to hire and talk about it with the teams. And the power in this is that when we did this, we learned that from talking to the engineers and the people the closest to the work, we learned that, well, the squad that you put over here really makes more sense in this organization. Here's why. We don't always have all the answers, maybe as the directors and managers. Even though we have positive intent, it's not that we're trying to make a bad decision, but like include the people is the tip, is the advice. And no matter what you do though, I think, well, let me hold that thought. Another thing you can do is even more open, which is like an open marketplace type concept where people choose their teams. There's a book called Creating Great Teams by Sandy Mamoli and David Mole that tells you step by step how to create an event to foster team changes where the people choose their teams. And there are constraints to each of the teams, maybe a certain amount of slots or different roles, but they have open events that foster this type of thing. So giving people choice and agency, I think, is really important. So over-communicating. Patrick Lencioni wrote 5 Dysfunctions of a Team in this wonderful book, The Advantage. No matter what you're doing, whether it's manager-assigned teams or self-selected teams or something in between, people won't get the message. Even if you say it 7 times, somebody's going to be like, what? What's going on? Right? So we're busy. So you got to use multiple communication channels. You got to be redundant about what the plan is. Bringing people together, having these cadences of information. You have to over-communicate. So they're really bored. They've been working together for a long time, right? They're sick of each other. They are even dressing as the same and really wanting a change. And so there's a dog over there. He needs a change. I think one of the shifts that we're seeing, at least, so the Gallup Corporation does studies of employee engagement. I pay attention to a lot of Gallup's stuff because I'm a strengths coach with Gallup. But the idea is, how can we help people find fulfillment? So like a lot of the focuses of new research and employee engagement are helping people find their paths, right? Like, what's my development path, my personal development path? How can I amplify my strengths, focusing on my life, as opposed to focusing here where I have my boss, my annual review, this is the stuff I need to work on, right? This is like my paycheck and my job. There's a shift, and they write in this book, It's the Manager, it's a new book, talks about how newer generations are different than some of I'm Generation X, right? Some of the other generations, maybe we've grown up in worlds like this, but the newer generations have a different bit of a focus. So there's shifts over to how can we help people find the best environments where they're really going to thrive every day, and it might mean changing and thinking differently. So the next step is about encouraging renewal and learning. How can we help foster growth of people so they don't leave our companies, but so that they can grow their careers within our companies? So and as our companies grow and change, we got to pay attention to this too. So I think, it has implications for reteaming. So if we pay attention to the people, like they're demonstrating mirroring. So they're standing up and they're looking at each other. Somebody comes to your desk, you stand up, you can face them, and like really put your attention out. People get really, really busy. Do you have a schedule? It's like you're overscheduled. You can't even find like a half-hour meeting slot. Like many of us are like that. But how can you have time for the people to find out their needs? I think if you do, you might learn things like this guy here who, Thomas, so he's at Procore, he was a quality assurance engineer, and he, in his spare time, would go surfing with his friends, and he decided, well, I'm going to learn how to code, and we're going to make an app to track our surfing sessions. And what he did was he invited software engineers to his house to pair program with them, and he made them this tamale. He was like making really good tamales. And he shifted after a while with support of the company and support of his coworkers to become a software engineer. And like 2 years ago, he made this shift. And I really love it because Linda Rising was talking about having a growth mindset, right? So the company was open enough to not put him in a box and say, oh, he's quality assurance forever, right? No, he like shifted and grew his career in the company. He values learning. I thought that was really cool. Inviting switching and renewal. So this is just we're a distributed company, but in one of the offices, at least one, they have the open hiring positions out in the open, and then it's available online too, but encouraging people to apply for a different role. So if you get in the state where people are stagnating, you can apply for something different and know who the hiring manager is. I think bringing it out in the open is helpful. That open space that we had spawned a guild of engineers who they call themselves the nomading group. So if you're a team member and you want to work on a different team for a little while and then go back to your team, you can go to them. They'll broker the connection. So one way to encourage this kind of learning and engagement is maybe to provide people opportunities to do a test. I'd love to go over there and work on machine learning. Pair program over there, maybe go back. They find the squads that are open to this idea and have open positions. Yeah, somebody can come over here. And then when these people go back to their teams, they have a different sense of energy. Or maybe they'll stay over on that team and learn that I'd like to be over there. We've seen that result of this. And these are just people helping people. But we learned that the people really want to have these kind of changes. Encouraging reflection, I think, is another tip, that it can generate reteaming and it can really help people. So there's a book called Designing Your Life. They talk about something called a good time journal. I mean, you could even think for yourself, think back to last week. When were you energized? When were you really in flow? What were you doing? When did you feel like you were really stagnating? So they encourage people to kind of look at this. And so we encourage managers to talk about things like this in their one-on-ones and help people find a place. We don't want to hoard the best team members in our teams, but how can we focus on the person who wants to learn and to grow? Because again, the future generations want that more than ever. How can we support that and help them shift within the company? And find that sweet spot. This is something that the company wants a role to do, and this is what the person wants. So it's like a continual looking for this sweet spot. Metrics to consider. So I think when your company is growing really fast, well, how do you know if you're successful in what you're doing? You can look at retention. You can look at, there are different tools. I've listed a couple that are related to people sharing their sentiment about how they're doing at the company and how they're feeling. Peakon is one where you can gradually give surveys to people to kind of gauge the health and get anonymous comments back that you can respond to. Culture AMP is another one. How do we gauge the sentiment of the people in our organization, especially when you're going through a lot of change and a lot of growth? You'll learn things that you wouldn't have learned before. I still, even after all these years, love it's called the Spotify Health Check. It's something that you can do with your teams to gauge the team health in a variety of different areas. If you Google Spotify Health Check, they have the easy to follow instructions. Christian Linwall and his friend wrote it. But how can we, if you have multiple teams, how do you choose your focus? Who might be ready for a change? Where are the areas that this team seems to be really thriving in all of the areas, and they self-report it? How can we help amplify what they're doing and help them get better? How can we pair other squads together to learn different things? So it's kind of like, with a lot of this area, I think it's like, what are we dealing with and what are our benchmarks? And it's a shift in focus more to people, team health, psychological safety, as opposed to, in the olden days, they were counting lines of code, right? All right, that's a completely different focus. Maybe people were looking at story points or velocity, completely different focus. This is a focus on how can we try to have people that are working at our company, how can we help try to ensure that they're excited to come to work each day? How can we know if somebody's ready for a shift? So some people wonder, okay, it seems like the mood is low. Maybe we should mix it up every once in a while and deliberately reteam on a cadence. People have told me that okay, we're really inspired now to go change up all our teams after they hear me talk. And I was like, God, that's not what I intended. I'm not trying to force a disruption of any sort. Because if you've got a great thing going, you don't want to mess with it. You want to keep the people together, right? So I'm not advocating something like this. But sometimes it's part of some company cultures. Pivotal Labs Cloud Foundry, Evan Wiley, who's a director of program management, he told me that they deliberately reteam on a cadence. They've been doing it for years. They have a wonderful internal tool that tells them how long people have been on teams, and they aim to have redundancy in their the way that they develop and the information sharing. They deliberately do that. It's part of their company culture. The Menlo Innovations, that was mentioned earlier by Linda as well. They pair program all the time, and people beyond coding roles also pair, and then they switch pairs. You learn that when you're interviewing, that this is what we do. So you opt into it, right? So this is like, some people do this stuff. I think the ways that people reteam are different across different companies. Some people do it at a cadence. Some people do it quite frequently, and you know when you're getting into the company that that's what to expect. This is the book Creating Great Teams I mentioned earlier, another blog post by a friend named Dana, but it's kind of like, should the people choose their teams? I don't know. Maybe you've got really, caring managers that help people find the right fit. It's not that there's one right way. I think, again, it's like, don't mess with a good thing. Appearances can be deceiving, by the way. They look pretty happy here, which is why I took this slide. But remember that earlier slide where they look like they're falling asleep? Who knows? They could have a very high-performing team. They're delivering value continuously to customers. It's an enjoyable experience. You got to dig in and talk to people and pay attention. Could be they had an off day. So you got to really get to know the teams and have people pay attention, not just delivery, delivery, delivery. Do people feel safe to share a differing opinion? You can start small. If you do want to shift energy, if you do feel like, and God, it's like, can we have something a little bit different? You could try an event to totally change the temperature, and then you go back and you feel refreshed. There are companies that have internal conferences, and they do things like we're doing here, and then they go back and you feel a different sense of being refreshed. So maybe something like that. And so the fifth point is reflecting and deciding how to shift. So we talk about retrospectives in Agile, focusing, maybe we do a if you're doing sprints, you're looking at the last sprint, or maybe you have a larger program and you're looking back at how things went. Hunter Industries in Southern California, where they're famous for where mob programming or programming in groups came about with Woody Zuhl, one of their engineering directors from way back when. They have a very strong retrospective culture. And one thing that I learned when I interviewed their director, Chris Lucian, for my reteaming book, one thing that I learned is that they just determined how they wanted to shift their reteaming based on retrospectives. They felt that what they had was anybody could move around as they wanted. And it was like feeling really fast. And when they talked about their team composition together, they learned that, that's too fast for us. We're having these challenges. And so what they determined was, all right, what we're going to do is, it's not going to be so open where anyone can reteam over there. It's going to be work it out with the other team, and then you tell the manager, but it's like this exchange where it's like a handshake. But they reflected on their team composition, and that's my point. It's like this team that I was with. They got together, they were having a retrospective, and they knew that they were going to be splitting in half. They had a new area of work, and they decided, we're gonna split into two teams. We're gonna grow and split, like a mitosis or meiosis or something, cell division, right? So they decided to do that, but they were working on multiple platforms. And so the two people that were working on iOS, they were like, wait a minute, we like to pair program. So what we're going to do is follow the priority. When they have a higher priority for us, we'll be with them. And when they have a higher priority for us, we'll go over here. And so they were doing this kind of back and forth and back and forth. And they decided in the end, that doesn't work for us. And then they split. And then those two teams were working together. And so I think the cool thing is that that was their experiment. That's what they wanted to try. They were trying to pursue how do we become more effective and how do we work better together. And they were given the ability to change their team composition. And so I think we can really experiment our way forward and determine how can we be more effective as a team. And having this lever to pull, I think, has been missing from Agile, because it's been kind of like, no, keep your teams the same, we'll change the work. But wait a minute, we're professionals. We can maybe make some decisions about how to change our team composition. We've solved harder problems before. So I think it's about that. And schedule the reflection. This is a team that split in half, and then they came back together. They were doing the story of their team across 2 teams. Schedule the feedback loop. If you try something and the teams change, put it on the calendar that you're going to follow up, like schedule the continuous improvement. So I talked about these 5 strategies: building relationships inside and across teams, coaching people through the culture change, including people and fostering agency, encouraging renewal and learning, and reflecting and deciding how to shift. I hope that was interesting for you and helpful. It's kind of how I see great ways to support teams when you're changing a lot. So my name is Heidi Hefland. I'll be here all day. It's really a pleasure to be here. I think maybe we have some time for questions, maybe 10 minutes for questions. So I would open that up. Why did I pick Iowa to go to school? Well, my aunt lived here. And I had visited the University of Iowa, and I was like, I'd love to be in Iowa City and have my aunt as a support. So I loved it. Yeah?
How do you provide predictability to your stakeholders while you're changing teams?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the question was, how do you provide predictability to your stakeholders when you're changing teams? Some teams like to estimate, and that's working for them. But for some teams, the estimation isn't working for them. And one of the initiatives that I'm working on with an architect named Tim Doherty, we brought in a consultant to help us, was how can we focus on probabilistic forecasting? So how can we learn to have a stable workflow so we can leverage that for giving probabilistic forecasts? So for example, we look at the lead time, and we get to know on the average through using some tools, no matter what we estimate, how long does it take us to build something in general? Like we have a ticketing flow. So we can say things like, well, looking at our stable flow, we can tell you that, well, maybe 85% of the time it takes us 10 days or less to complete an item. Or maybe with 50% certainty, we can do it in 4 days or less. How much risk do you want to assume? So we use different tactics with limiting work in progress and looking at delayed tickets in our workflow during stand-up, and monitoring our flow using some tools to help provide better forecasts. And it doesn't take that long. Like, lead time is the metric to look at, even if your teams are changing. So it's kind of like the best that we can do in changing team situations. But even if the teams aren't changing very long, I would look into those approaches. There's a wonderful book called Actionable Agile Metrics by Dan Vacanti, and he has another book called When Will It Be Done? And so I can share more about the forecasting initiative that we're having, because we're trying to diffuse these techniques across, I don't know, 80+ teams. But we work with the teams that are looking for a strategy for having better predictability. For some teams, it's really not an issue. And they're using methods of their own devise, which are working for them. So they're fine. But we help the willing. We help the people that are like, I got these enterprise customers, and we need to provide better transparency into where we're at and better, future looking. So I'm happy to talk more about that. Lead time, yeah. Any other questions? Well, I hope this was useful. I'll be around for the rest of the day. I'd love to talk about any of these concepts. So thanks so much.